Today's program offers 1 CEU for pesticide license renewal and 1 CEU for certified crop advisors. If you need CEUs, email me your name, email address, and license number. The program sponsors are Sarah Marker and Gerald Hack with Valent. They are paying for your refreshments and lunches if you are attending in person. Today's program will focus on getting a head start for summer weed control. What works best in citrus? Our guest speaker is Dr. Ramdas Kanissery, Assistant Professor in Weed Science at the UF-IFAS Southwest Florida Research and Education Center in Immokalee. As you know, if not controlled effectively, weeds can compete with trees, particularly young trees, for water, nutrient, and even light in the case of climbing vines, which can easily cover trees. Weed control is often tricky in Florida citrus throughout the year. However, it is even more challenging during the summer as weeds love hot and rainy weather. Dr. Kanissery's presentation will provide tips to help create the best strategies to minimize weeds in the groves during summer. Summer is also the best time to prevent widespread weeds infestations in citrus groves later into the year. Grower will get better control with a good weed management program in the late spring and early summer. Then they wait until the midsummer when weeds such as Spanish needles, guinea grass, and other weeds get larger, tougher, and have set seeds that will keep the weed control difficult for years to come. Dr. Kanissery, it's all yours. Go ahead.
Thank you, Manji. Thank you. I hope all can hear me, the participants in the Zoom as well. Please let us know if you are having issues, technical issues hearing us. So good morning. I'm Ramdas Kanissery, and I'm going to talk about some weed control today. So the main theme or main topic I want to touch base today is how to suppress weeds effectively with a good head start in summer. Summer is approaching, right? So as Monji said, a good weed suppression in summer is like half done, half job done for the rest of the year. So this is how I have the outline, talk outline, just to give you an idea on how I have organized this talk. I'm going to talk about some of the current and novel citrus herbicide options we have. Then just touch base with the topic of tree safe weed control, which is very important, particularly from a weather setting in the summer. And also I will real quick touch base with some raw middle vegetation management as well, which also it's when you think about citrus weed control system, raw middle weed control or vegetation management is a part of that as well, before summarizing everything. So in the next month or so, I mean, it's already here, summer is here. So who doesn't like Florida summer? People are coming all the way up from up north to enjoy this weather. So all of us enjoy Florida summer, and so does the weeds. So summer is the time where most of the weeds, they start flourishing, they start producing flowers, seeds, and set the seed bank in the soil. So in my observation, mainly broadleaf weeds, when compared to grasses, broadleaf has this advantage to rule the summer months because of their peculiar ability to assimilate sunlight into food because of their broadleaf nature. It doesn't mean that we are not going to see grasses, but depending on the pressure in your location, you are going to see grasses as well. But generally, compared to spring and fall, summer boosts a lot of broadleaves, such as Spanish needle, cutleaf evening primrose, and very recently we are noticing a bit of new weed species in Florida, such as Pennsylvania cudweed, which we haven't seen a lot in citrus before, but we are seeing these days. Also, Florida pellitory is another weed, that growers are complaining a lot. It's a broadleaf weed. It's a seasonal, but again, it can take over the whole citrus tree rows if not managed. So the point here is we're going to see a lot of weeds in the summer, and we need to control it timely. Otherwise, you're gonna, I mean, it will go a long run if you control that, if you had a good hold of that in the summer, right? So we have a lot of tools in our toolbox, and we all know, I mean, although we have different strategies, the best strategy that works for under tree or tree row weed control in citrus is herbicides. They are, they are easily available, probably cost effective, as well as it works, right? The herbicides is the best tool we can have in the toolbox. So I'm going to talk about some of the available post-emergent options we have in citrus. Post-emergent meaning it's applied on the emerged weeds. So it's a good strategy for getting a good cleanup of whatever you have in the summer. So it's important to have a good cleanup going on with post-emergent herbicides. And I don't want to give you, spend a lot of time on the options we have in terms of post-emergence. We have excellent resources for that. Outside, you can see on the bench, we have a Florida Citrus Production Guide, where we have a chapter dedicated to weeds with all the herbicides, including post-emergent herbicides, their rates, all the restrictions and things like that. But, these are some of the non-selective ones we have. For example, if you have a mixed pressure, like you have broadleaf weeds, grasses, sedges, everything growing on, these are some of the options you have for a broad spectrum of weed control. Some of these herbicides are having a little bit of restrictions and trainings and things like that. For example, paraquat is having needs extra usage trainings and things like that. Then glyphosate is there, and glufosinate ammonium, again, it's kind of an alternative to glyphosate. We have talked about a lot in the last couple of years. So when it comes to selective herbicides, the couple of options we have, especially for broadleaf weeds, as I mentioned, summer, we are going to see a lot of broadleaf weeds. We have saflufenacil, the trade name is Trevix, and we have now 2,4-D registered to use in citrus. Also, we have a combination of 2,4-D and glyphosate, which is Landmaster, and 2,4-D in several trade names like Embed Extra and things like that. So this works. In my observations, these two materials works great on if you have a heavy pressure of just the broadleaf weeds, such as Spanish needle, parsley, ragweed parthenium. We are hearing a lot of issues with the ragweed parthenium, and the common ragweed and ragweed parthenium look alike, but they respond differently to different herbicides. For example, common ragweed can be easily or effectively controlled with glyphosate, but when it is ragweed parthenium, also known as white top, when you see the white flowers, it will not respond very well to glyphosate, even with very high rates of glyphosate. You have to go with saflufenacil or 2,4-D like material here. Then goatweed and nightshade. So all these pressures, if you have it, those two selective broadleaf herbicides are good. And again, we're going to see some grasses as well, not as much as in other seasons, but again, you're going to see some guinea grass, Bermuda grass, and Johnson grass. And for grasses, we have a couple of options: selective grass killers like fluacifop, fusilade is a trade name, and cethoxidime with the trade name Post Plus. Okay, so these are good materials for controlling the grass weeds. So one of the things I want to bring to the table when you use post-emergence herbicides to improve their efficacy is to get an adequate coverage. For example, if you use a systemic herbicide like glyphosate, they have the inherent ability to get absorbed into the weed and get moved all the way from roots to the top. But when we use carfentrazone or paraquat, carfentrazone, the trade name is AIM, they do not move a lot because it's a contact type herbicide. So they have very limited translocation in the weed. So you have to use a good coverage. You have to make sure to get the best bang out of the buck. We need to make sure we have a good spray volume. So in our experiments, we found a good spray volume for post-emergent herbicides, especially for carfentrazone, is 20 to 40 gallons per acre with a 30-gallon sweet spot in between. So that is very important. Also the rates. So here is a picture I want to show you how optimal rates can impact the weed control. This is goat weed, which is kind of a problematic weed. We're seeing a lot of goat weed issues these days. So With paraquat, 1 pint per acre of paraquat did not even touch it. The rate, the level of effectiveness was as similar to untreated control. But when you use a higher rate of paraquat, it's kind of burning it. Although you are getting a top kill here, it can get a control. So rate is very important. If you think your weed is in a mature growth stage, started flowering and setting seeds, if the label allows this, goes with the maximum label rate, especially for contact herbicides such as AIM or gramoxone. And surfactant, very important here. So I want to show you a picture we have. This is a picture of a cabbage leaf. If you know cabbage leaves, they're one of those leaves that has the most waxy coating. And it's very difficult to get a spray holding or retaining onto the cabbage leaf. But with the use of surfactants, this is a picture of a UV picture of a blue dye in the spray, and you can see it can easily hold that leaf. So the message I want to bring to the table here, it is very important when you use a post-emergence herbicide to use surfactants, and you have to pay attention to the compatibility of surfactants with the herbicides as well. For example, we have found saflufenacil or 3 weeks, the broadleaf herbicide, it will not work with any of the non-ionic surfactants like Li 700 or anything like that. It's basically, it's going to give you a reverse effect where the material will not work. For example, I think the speculation is this surfactant, NIS, will impair with the chemistry of this material, and it prevents its absorption into the leaves. So do not use NIS with saflufenacil, but instead use MSO or methylated seed oil. Similarly, when you have grass pressure and when you're using cethoxidime or like post or fusilade, make sure you get the best effect when you have a crop oil concentrate surfactant. So there are the main groups of surfactants are non-ionic surfactants, methylated seed oil, crop oil concentrate, and we have another group known as organosilicones. So it's important to look at the label and see what they have prescribed. For example, saflufenacil label, they have said only use methylated seed oil. Otherwise, you're not going to get any effect. Similarly, if you have grass killers, if you have crop oil concentrate, it will actually, you might get a 50% more effect with a crop oil concentrate and things like that. So pay attention to those things and other adjuvants such as buffers. So the research shows that when you have a water pH of the herbicides, most herbicides works when the pH of the water is between 4 and 6. That's the optimal pH for a should be the optimal pH for a herbicide solution. If your pH, water pH in your farm is beyond this limit, usually if you have a high pH because of salt content, hard water and things like that, definitely use a buffering agent such as Quest or Buffer 75, or even ammonia-based fertilizers like AMS, ammonium sulfate, as suggested by the label. This is very important because otherwise, some of the examples are glyphosate or 3 weeks. These formulations are not going to work if you do not have a buffering agent or AMS in it. It's again putting money in the drain. You're going to spray, you might see a little bit of yellowing. That's all you get. The weeds are going to come back. But if you have an AMS or buffer in the spray solution with a good pH from 4 to 6, that's the weeds can easily uptake the material, and the herbicide is going to do the job. So pay attention to this as well. And we talked about several post-emergence herbicides. So use this toolbox to rotate. For example, do not use glyphosate in all the seasons. Usually, in my observation, most pre-emergence herbicide, depending on your weed pressure, is going to give you at least 2 months of control, maybe 2.5 months of control. So if you want to go for another follow-up spray, try to rotate the materials. For example, we have several options, right? So instead of using glyphosate 3 times a year, use something like a AIM, then followed by glyphosate and glufosinate. This system works very well, especially this will not let that weeds to adapt. Weeds are very smart, They can actually slowly develop that tolerance to this herbicide chemistry, and they will start to adapt. So if you have the same program going on, slowly, you're going to see less effectiveness. But if you try to bring in new materials, if you try to rotate it in a year, you can see a better kill over the time. And this really helps manage weed tolerance. Luckily, in citrus, we don't see a lot of weed resistance. But in several field crops, if you think about southeastern United States, like, maybe peanuts or corn or cotton, herbicide resistance is a big issue because of the use of the same herbicide over and over. But in citrus, luckily, we don't have any. Only reported weed resistance is a paraquat resistant black nightshade from North Florida. Otherwise, we don't have any reported. But there is a lot of reports of tolerance. For example, goatweed is tolerant to glyphosate. And several other weeds are getting tolerant to many herbicides. So to avoid this, to manage this, it is very important to bring that rotation into your program. And several of us think about how would we can mix post-emergent herbicides, what to mix and what not to mix. So the label, again, is a good source to know what you can mix. For example, we have found when you mix glyphosate with saflufenacil, you get a little bit more spectrum of weed control. If there is weed grasses in your area, and if you're using saflufenacil, it is a good to mix it with glyphosate. You can get control of the grasses as well. So the rule of thumb here is you can mix 2 systemic herbicides, but you should not mix a systemic with a contact herbicide. For example, if you mix glyphosate with carfentrazone or AIM, you are not going to get an effect. But what happens here is AIM is going to give a kill of the tissues within the 2 hours. But glyphosate is a slow actor. It needs its own time to move through the tissue. So since the AIM already killed the tissues, glyphosate cannot move through the plants, and you are actually putting money in the drain. That the glyphosate effect is not going to see. So do not mix glyphosate with carfentrazone or glyphosate with paraquat. But you can mix glyphosate with your grass killers, which are systemic in nature, right? So now, this is some small things that we do not notice much, but if you pay attention to these things, you're going to get, again, the best efficacy. So we observed that for certain herbicides such as glufosinate, for example, Scout, the sunlight plays a very important role. But again, if you look at the picture here, we have a control. This is pigweed, actually. And we sprayed glufosinate at 10 p.m. in the night, and we have a spray at 1 p.m. This was a greenhouse study. And you can see how the presence of that light or midday application brought in a best control there. So if you have a glufosinate scheduled in your program, just let the time break in and sunlight comes up, and do that application if possible in the midday rather than using it in the early morning or afternoon. This will really help. This is going to help you, get a better control for most of the broadleaf weeds. And it has been observed that sunlight plays a big role in post-emergent, the effectiveness of post-emergent herbicides. So that's about sunlight. Other weather factor I want to bring into the discussion here is rainfall, because in Florida, when you look at the annual rainfall, where are all this rainfall concentrated? In summer months, right? June, July, August. That's the time we get the most rainfall. And that is the time we are going to have a summer weed control program going in. So rain fastness of the herbicides is very important. It's a time between the application or spray and the time we need to give the product to dry and to perform effectively. So it is important to think about rainfall when you are planning a post-emergence herbicides. I have put together a table here on several herbicides, their rain fast period. For example, most herbicides comes within a 6-hour time. So it is important to at least give a 6-hour time period before the rainfall to get the herbicide dried up and does its job. Otherwise, the application is going into vain. I mean, it's not going to affect. The rain is going to wash it off, the product from the leaf surface, and there is no point in applying the herbicide. So it is important to pay attention to rainfall, especially in summer, because we are going to expect a lot of rainfall in summer. Landmaster is an example, actually 2,4-D and glyphosate. It needs at least 6 hours of that drying period. But most of the other herbicides, you can, glufosinate, a Scout needs 4 hours, but most of them are within 30 minutes to 1 hour. But again, a general rule of thumb, make sure you have a 6-hour window or half day, if possible 1 day window of a dry period when you plan your post-emergent herbicide. So when you think about post-emergence, again, great tool. We have several options. We have selective, we have non-selective, we have grass killers, broadleaf killers. All of them, are great tools. So depending on the pressure, what pressure you have, whether you have a mixed pressure or grasses or broadleaf, select those herbicides from the toolbox and use a surfactant or a buffer or AMS or ammonium sulfate and utilize the spray volume. As I mentioned, 20 to 40 is the magic number. If you can get a 30 gallons per acre application, that's the best. And if you spray during ample sunlight with a rain-free period and low wind, wind is very important, which I'm going to talk about a little bit when it comes to tree safety. But wind always creates issues in terms of drift and injury and things like that. And apply this to a very non-stressed, actively growing weeds, you're going to get a very effective post-emergent weed controls. And to me, as a weed scientist, the only good weed is a dead weed. So that was about the post-emergent. Any questions there? Or we can save the questions to the last. But I'm going to switch gears a little bit to the weed suppression utilizing pre-emergence here. Okay. So summer. The theme is summer here, right? Summer is also the excellent time for a lot of weed emergence because the soil, the top 4 to 5 inches of the soil is a soil seed bank. Whatever seeds you have, it's staying there, getting for the right opportunity to come up, and you have plenty of sunlight. You have good rainfall in the summer. It's a field day for the weed seeds. It's going to emerge a lot in the summer. And we have to make sure we control it, we suppress it with a pre-emergent program. That is soil applied residual herbicide, which is going to stay in the soil in that 4 inches and control it, all right, to make sure it's not coming up. Once it's coming up, so the research shows that about 15% of the seeds in the soil seed bank is going to germinate immediately in the next season. 15%. And think about some of this pigweed or goat weed, which is going to make about 100,000 seeds per plant. 15% of that is going to come up in your citrus tree row. So you have to bring in a residual herbicide program, a pre-emergence program for your weed suppression. So again, I'm just going to show some options here. A lot of options we have, depending on what type of pressure you have. All the information we have in the production book. Also, we have a couple of quick guides which give you, easy information on this type of herbicides. So into this list, I'm going to bring in 2 new materials, relatively new materials that we are studying. One is rimsulfuron, an example is Provin, and a flazosulfuron. Flazosulfuron is a material which has a both pre and post emergent activity. So we are finding if you have a little bit of weed growth, very, very early stage, you can apply flazosulfuron and it's going to give you a little bit of post emergence control, but at the same time, it will stay in the soil and suppress both broadleaves and grass weed emergence. So these are some of the 2 new additions I would like to talk about to add to this list, actually, the list of pre-emergence herbicides. We are doing some observations and, data is coming, but I just want to let you know these 2 tools are there in the toolbox out there for pre-emergence suppression of weeds and citrus. So you all know this. I mean, when you use a pre-emergence or residual herbicides, we have to make sure you have a good cleanup with a post-emergence herbicide if you have a lot of weed pressure. We talked about post-emergence tools for that. And when you apply this to the clean soil, that works the best. If you have a little bit of weed growth, you can mix in, we can tang mix your pre-emergence with a post-emergence tang mix partner. For example, this is a great resource that I want to bring to the table. If you don't have it already, it's a good idea. You can have it. It's available. It's an app available in the iPhone or Google Play, and there is a link also. So this will help you to select your mixing partners, and it should also give you an idea on how you should mix the herbicides. For example, if you have a Chateau, if you have a glyphosate, and if you're using AMS, if you're using some other surfactant, you put in there, and it will give you the right order of mixing them, which is very important because, if you go ahead and start mixing your surfactant first into your tank, it's going to completely, chaotic. It will be chaos for the whole system because then whatever herbicide you're going to add it will not dissolve, or it will not, mix up very nicely. So you have to follow that mixing order when you think about, the mixing, tank mixing. So this is a great tool for that. And also I want to talk about the irrigation. When you have a pre-emergence going on, a little bit of rain is good. So post-emergence, you have to think about the rainfall ahead and give some dry period. But pre-emergence soil residual herbicides, when you apply that in the soil, the rainfall actually activated, because then in that way, these herbicides the active ingredient can come to the soil solution so that it can be easily sucked up by the weed seeds, so that it will work in the weed seeds. So rainfall or irrigation is beneficial for soil applied residual or pre-emergent herbicides, okay? So this is a tool or app for getting the right mixing order if you're planning for tank mixing. So speaking of tank mixing, one of the main focus of my program when I started here was to look at how we can bring in the synergy between the pre-emergence. It's a very common practice to mix post-emergence, but when it comes to the pre-emergence, usually it was not there. We do not mix pre-emergence a lot, but we found that in citrus as a perennial system, it's a good practice. It's a strategy. When you mix more than one pre-emergence in the tank with from a different modes of action, you're going to get a higher effectiveness. This is the speculation, okay? If you have two modes of action in your soil as a result of pre-emergent tank mixing, it's going to give you a double whammy on the weed seed suppression. Some herbicides works great on grass weed suppression. Some herbicides works great on the broadleaf weed suppression. So if you have both of these AIs or active ingredients in the soil, if one seed escape that MOA or mode of action, there is always another chemistry in the soil to kill that, right? So this is what we were trying to do. So these are some of the, from our trials, these are some of the optimal or effective, in our observations, that worked as a tank mix partner, pre-emergence tank mix partners. I have talked about some of this already in the previous talks, because Flumi plus Indaziflam is a great. So we found that when you use Flumi as a standalone program, you have to use at least 8 ounce to 12 ounce. But when you try to mix it with Allium, you can cut down the rates of Flumi to 6. And you can also cut down the rates of Allium to 3 as well. So this was the main attracting factor in mixing. You can really cut down the rate, and you can be a little bit more cost effective. And not only that, it's more effective. It can help manage tolerance, and you get a couple of months of extra weed suppression window. So Flumi and Diuron is another combinations that we tried successfully. Flumioxazine and norflurazone, recently we found that that's a good suppression. That's a good mix as well. For example, 8 ounce and 3 pounds of Solicam, and you can get a good 4 to 5 months weed suppression. Then Rimsulfuron, proven, I talked to you about that. It also mixes very well with Indaziflam or Allium. So all these mixes well in the tank also. It's easy to apply. And once you apply, you get a good 4.5, 5 months of weed control. Plus, you can actually cut down the rates when you compare this with a standalone pre-emergence program. So this is an example I want to show. I'm not going to show any data, but these are based on several studies over the last 3-4 years. And you can see Indaziflam and Flumi with 2 months and a control. So it can clear, it's very clean. So it can stay in the soil, does its job, okay? So now I want to also bring another strategy into the table here. So pre-emergence, very important to bring into the program, right? So usually this pre-emergence herbicides has to be retained in the topsoil. 4 inches, the weed activity, all the drama takes place there. The weed seeds are there. They are going to germinate from the weed seeds, and the weed emergence happens. So that AI, active ingredient, has to be retained into an organic matter or clay material in the soil to kill the weeds, to prevent the weed suppression. I'm talking about normal crop production soil, but this is what we are dealing with Florida, in soils in Florida. Less than 1% organic matter. As a result, none of this material, it's very difficult. Even some of the herbicides such as Allium, Indaziflam, which is supposed to have a higher retention capacity or absorption capacity, it's very difficult to stay in the Florida sandy soil in the top 4 inches. So no matter what you apply, like even if you apply high rates of soil, you may not see that concurrent increase in the effectiveness, because even with a high rate, with the rainfall, it's going to go from the top 4 inches. So something that we are trying is the utilization of adjuvants, a special group of adjuvants. I like to call them as herbicide deposition agents or herbicide retention agents into the tank mix. For examples are hydrovant or grounded. There are several products out there. So the speculation here is, we have tried it with flumioxazine again. So what happens, these are materials that actually, it's originally used as a spray drift reduction agent. So what it does is, it will not prevent a small droplet. Rather, it will encourage the spray to make a large droplet. So what happens here is that large droplet will get stuck in the pore spaces in the sandy soil texture. It will not percolate or leach or move downwards. Rather, it will stay in that top 4 inches, because these materials, these adjuvants, they are encouraging the spray to form a large droplets as opposed to ultra small droplets. Okay, so this is the hypothesis, working hypothesis. So I'm going to show you a data where you have weed control on the y-axis, and x-axis we have weeks after treatment. We have Flumi here, untreated check. So as you can see, Flumi did work a great job. Then slowly, maybe after 10 weeks or so, it started breaking down, started percolating, started leaching down, and then and the effectiveness is reduced. But when you have Flumi mixed with that adjuvant, in this case we used hydrovant. The same we found with grounded also, the same type of effect you can see from the grounded. I have a graduate student, Ruby, here, who is working with grounded in vegetable system. So that helped this material to stay in that 4 inches, because again, what it does is simple. It's reducing the spray droplet size, and it's preventing, as soon as you apply it, it's going to stay in the topsoil, and it gives the time for the AI to get stuck or bind onto the soil surface. So it works. It's not going to make a lot of difference. I would say it may help you to get a couple of weeks, maybe 3 weeks of weed control suppression. But the good thing here is it's only going to add a couple of dollars per acre. It's not reinventing the wheel, but it's just like a surfactant, but it might help you to bring you or buy you a little more time in terms of weed suppression. And it's very important in the weed control world, right? You need time. So this is again a photo I want to show you from that experiment. We have Flumi and adjuvant there, very clean, and we have an untreated control where you can see the weeds started coming up a lot. This is a 3 months observation. So that was about the current and available options we have in terms of post-emergence as well as pre-emergence, and some of the strategies I want to discuss to improve the effectiveness of these materials. Okay, any questions so far? Okay, so I'm gonna take a small switch here because I hear a lot from the growers about some of the tough weeds they have in their grove. So I'm going to talk about some of the specific management strategies for these troublesome weeds that we see a lot in these days. Spanish needle. Everyone is having issues with Spanish needle, ragweed, parthenium, and coatweed. As I mentioned, some of the time, a regular post-emergence material may not touch it. These are getting more and more tolerant to generic herbicides or general herbicides such as AIM or paraquat or glyphosate. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about the options that in our observations, in our trials, what are their effectiveness, how they are effective. For example, I'm going to show you pre-emergence first and post-emergence into the table. Then also make sure there is a mode of action numbers here. The idea is, the rotation. Do not use the same herbicide with the same mode of action over and over. If you have an option, if there is a possibility, make sure you use a different mode of action as a follow-up spray. So, for example, for Spanish needle, the estimated effectiveness rating I have here, we have Allion and Chateau as a very good pre-emergence suppression. Then post-emergence, the excellent suppression, in my opinion, is Trevix, which is pretty good on a Spanish needle. And you have Scout or Rely also provide, like glufosinate AI, also provide good control. I have not seen a good control. It's going to give you a top kill, but it may not give you a very good kill for Spanish needles. Glyphosate, it's erratic, or sometimes it gives a good control, sometimes not. So if you have a heavy Spanish needle pressure, I would go with a Trevix or a Scout as to post-emergence option, and definitely bring in a Flumi or Indaciflam as a pre-emergent option. Same for the ragweed, Flumi and Indaciflam did work, and Trevix or Saplofenacil as well as glufosinate worked well for ragweed parthenium. Goatweed also. Goatweed is a very interesting weed because you try Saplofenacil on goatweed, it's not going to work. So goatweed has a very small leaf surface. It has one of the tiniest leaf in the citrus weed world. So it is very difficult for it to absorb through the leaves. So you have to get an absorption going on through the stem. And in my observation, glyphosate and 2,4-D combination, that is Landmaster, worked best for goatweed control if you have a heavy goatweed pressure. And when you use paraquat or AIM, they do only fair job. Goatweed has this special ability to grow back from the roots as well. So the top kill or condat kill is not going to be enough. So grasses, we have again prowl, apart from Indaci and Flumi, good material. And for grasses, I would say Fusilade and Post are the best materials, as we discussed before. AIM, if you apply AIM, if you have a heavy grass pressure, it's not going to touch it. It's just nothing. In fact, sometimes I have seen AIM as stimulating the growth of grasses in many cases. I don't know why, but it's not going to. AIM work great on broadleaves, but not on grasses. So if you have grasses, do not use AIM. It's not going to work. So if you have many times we have grasses growing very neck and neck with the citrus. So the guinea grass has this very bad habit of growing very near the drip line or the sprinkler. So it is very tough situation. You cannot spray herbicide because it's going to kill or injure the citrus tree. So try to do some spot treatment with this grass killers at a 1.5 to 2.25 volume per volume solution. Make sure you do not get a contact on the leaf of the citrus, but it's going to work. Dayflower is another interesting weed. We see that a lot in Southwest Florida, also a lot in the Lake Alfred, Central Florida area. So one would think it's a broadleaf weed, but no, it is a monocot. It's more related to a sugarcane or a grasses than a broadleaf weed, right? But when it comes to the control, it responds very well to the Landmaster or 2,4-D, glyphosate plus 2,4-D combination. That's the best, in my opinion, as a post-emergent for controlling dayflower. And nutsedge, we see a lot of nutsedge emergence. Not only nutsedge, there are different types of sedge in Southeast Florida. We see yellow nutsedge, purple nutsedge, annual sedges or globe sedges, green killinga. They all look, a little bit similar, but there are typical identifying features for them. But their management options are pretty same. And we have glyphosate or glufosinate as good post-emergent options, and Indaciflam, Flumi, or Diuron as pre-emergence option. So one of the things that we observed for nutsedge, it is very important, whatever you do as a post-emergent spray, it is very important to spray it before they form the tubers. Because once they start putting out the tubers, they will have tolerance kicking in. They can retaliate very easily from your herbicide program. But it takes about 2 months to get the nutsedge developing some tubers and things like that. So get them as early as possible. So does for goatweed as well as Spanish needle. All these problem weeds, if you suspect they are coming up in your grow, just hit them in their 2 to 3 leaf stage. It's going to kill. But otherwise, when you let it grow, produce flowers and seeds, the more and more into their life cycle, the more and more tolerant it will become, right? So now I want to touch base with one thing here. In summer, one of the things that we think about summer is heat stress, right? Heat is gonna kick in by June, July. It will be reaching 90 plus, 95 plus. So this temperature has a big effect on the herbicide effectiveness. For example, I'm going to show this picture is an example of a weed with a heat stress, which is wilted. So in this condition, if you spray anything, it's not going to work. The weed has to be in a very active metabolic state, very active growth stage for that herbicide to work. So particularly for glyphosate or those grass killers, It's not going to work when the temperature is about 90 degrees Fahrenheit. So it is worthwhile to wait until the temperature cool down, or if you have a very cold, hot day that you have planned for this glyphosate or cethoxidime or fusilade, make sure you apply it in the morning when there is not much heat. And the same for 240. 240 products, when you apply 240 based products, temperature can really cause a lot of volatility and there will be a lot of crop injury issues. So when you have a very high temperature, 95 degree plus with a heavy heat stress, make sure you use a high rate as well as a good surfactant, because that's going to help you get a little bit more effectiveness. So it is generally, so usually in my observation, the best herbicide program, the temperature, air temperature should be between 65 to 85 degrees. So this is the time you get the best herbicide program kicking in, the best effectiveness in terms of a kill. So now that was about the herbicide option, the chemical weed control we have in citrus that we have to keep in mind when we prepare for the summer. Now let me touch base with a few research updates from tree-safe weed control when using herbicides. So we all know, especially in summer with this tropical weather, wind and things like that, there's going to be a lot of drift happening. There will be a lot of spray contact that's going to happen to the low lying branches and things like that. For example, glyphosate, when it comes contact with the foliage, you're going to see some needle-shaped leaves. So you have to make sure the boom sprayer is in the proper height, deliver the herbicide to the target. And I think in the late last year, we have a program with Monji where I talked about OC nozzle angle placement and things like that. So proper OC nozzle angle is very important. Higher the angle, highly likely your spray is gonna drift or move to the lower branches and cause spray contact. So those things we need to keep in mind. Same with not only the glyphosate or post-emergent herbicides, even if you have a contact with a pre-emergent such as indaciflam, you're going to see some damage. Same for diuron. Bleaching is a typical for when you have a diuron contact. So whether it is pre or post, when you apply, you have to make sure you have to keep tree safety in mind, right? And there will be root uptake as well. This is an example of diuron root uptake from the soil. So root uptake related injuries usually happens in the top branches. So that's a clue that you can use, whether it is a spray contact or root uptake. Spray contact happens at lower branches, and root uptake, highly likely it's going to come into the veins and to the top foliage. So anyways, and again, in the young trees, it's worthwhile to use the protective wraps and always use low rates of herbicides in young plantings for ensuring the herbicide safety. So not only that, so one of the other crux of my program is to look at how the herbicides, whether it is post-emergence or pre-emergence, 50% or more of the herbicide we are applying is reaching the soil. Soil is a big sink for herbicide chemicals, and there is going to be degradation happening there. And how this degradation or movement is impacting the citrus trees. For example, if you look at our Immokalee soil, we call them sandy soil. But if you look a little bit more deeper, you have a hard pan at about 50 centimeters from the surface. So this hard pan or sporic layer or high water table and impact the movement of herbicides in the soil. So with this scenario, we are looking at how some of this herbicide persistence, popular citrus herbicide, and how they are impacting the root exposure, or how the root exposure is causing the effect on the root health, and if this herbicide use is adding or contributing to a stress, because we are already having a heavily stressed trees from citrus greening or HLB. We are doing anything and everything at it right now. So we want to make sure the herbicides that we are using in citrus is not adding to this stress. Okay. For that, we are looking at the root impact of root growths on the herbicides. We utilize micro-rhizotron technique. I'm just gonna brush through that real quick. We take the images from different treatments, we process it through the software, and we look at the root growth from different herbicides. For example, one of my graduate students who just graduated, he did a work with diuron and indaciflam, which are considered as a herbicides that may have some putative or argumentally some impact on the root growth. But in our study, you can see here, none of these herbicides had any impact on the root growth rate of a citrus. This is a study we did in about 6 years of citrus, which is 6 years age, very actively growing citrus, but the application, the repeated application of diuron or indaziflam did not impact its root growth, in this case at least. We are screening at other herbicides as well. So the good news here is the pre-emergence herbicides we are utilizing now is doing its job, not staying in the soil for a long time, but doing its job, not getting any impact on the root health or the subsequent crop health in citrus. So it's safe to use them, at least at this time. Another observation we were making was on fruit drop. Right? We published a paper this year where we looked at glyphosate, because it's one of the most heavily used herbicide in citrus, even not in Florida, but in California and other citrus producing states also. So we looked at how glyphosate behave in a citrus production system from a particular focus of tree safety or crop safety, right? So one of the component we were looking at was the fruit detachment force, the force with which the fruit can get attached to the peduncle, how that force can be impacted by higher rates of glyphosate. So we had an interesting observation here. You can see here the glyphosate rate kind of negatively correlated with the fruit detachment force in a mature citrus fruit. So based on this observation, we are advising to stay away from glyphosate application in a fruit maturity window. For example, 8 weeks. If you have a fruit hanging there and it's ready to get picked, but within that 8 weeks of application, 8 weeks period, stay away from glyphosate application. Rather, wait until the harvest and then come back to the glyphosate application. This will help you improve the fruit safety, yield safety. I'm not saying glyphosate is causing the fruit drop, but there may be something happening there that is reducing that fruit detachment force. So it is not the front runner for causing the fruit drop, but if there is a secondary force there, like a wind or something, it might fall. So to just be on the cautious side, even in Hamlin or Valencia, so within that 8 to 10 weeks period, if you have a glyphosate program, just stay away, but rather come back to that after the harvest. Okay. So now the last part of this topic of this talk, raw middle vegetation management, which is also very important because in summer you're going to get a lot of vegetation in the raw middles, right? Not only we like to keep some vegetation in the raw middles, but not a lot. So usually we have a good sod culture going on there, good grass, a mat of grass growing there. So we usually mow it. So something that we found that the more you mow, the grasses are going to get more vigorous. So at some point of time, you may have to mow every 2 weeks or something like that, because these grasses, especially guinea grass or bahia grass, whatever you have it in the raw middles, they can suck up a lot of moisture from the soil. So especially it's going to add a lot to the water stress in the soil. So one strategy, maybe you are all doing this, is to combine a mechanical mowing with a chemical application. We call it chemical mowing, where you mow, then wait 1 to 2 weeks and apply a very low dose of glyphosate. So optimal doses such as 3.5 to 10.5 ounce per acre of Roundup Power Max. Usually for under tree rows, we use about 60 to 80 ounce. But in this case, you have a very low sublethal rate of glyphosate application going into the raw middle. That way, you can suppress that regrowth of grasses. So that way you can reduce the growth as well as you can span out your mowing interval. So this is a workable strategy to increase your effectiveness in the raw middle vegetation management. Chemical mowing, it's taking two strategies, putting together in the toolbox, and it's a great strategy. So it's a mechanical mowing plus chemical application. It can really help in the long run. So we are also looking at some of the cover crops, how we can utilize this in the raw middle. We have a project with Dr. Sarah Strauss and Dr. Ute, where we look at how cover crops benefits in citrus production in the raw middle vegetation management. There are a number of benefits, but we are interested in the weed growth. So this is an example I want to show. This is how we plant in the raw middle, and the raw middle, the crops are coming up a little bit, and then by 4th month, you have a good lush vegetation of sun hemp, daikon radish, and ryegrass. So the advantages here, you don't have to mow, you don't have to apply herbicides. It's going to attract a lot of pollinators. It's actually provides a better ecosystem. At the same time, it's going to add some organic matter to the soil. So it's an emerging practice in Florida citrus, and we are doing more work on that. And you can see here in the cover cropped area, you have all non-cover cropped area, you have all sort of grasses, guinea grass, black nightshade, geranium, all nasty weeds. But in the cover cropped area, you have daikon radish just taking up the space. Finally, wineweed. I cannot finish this without talking about wineweed, because this is something that we do not see a lot, but once we have it, it's a ticking time bomb. So you see milkweed vine or balsam apple all the time. This is an example of a very heavy wineweed infestation in citrus. So what do you have to do, wineweed? Sometimes we try to pull it from the tree, disentangle it from the tree. It's not easy. But even if you do that, its roots can still stay in the soil, and it's going to grow up and do the same thing. So the best strategy here is first disentangle the vine as much as possible, cut it, leaving a stump above the soil, and then apply it with a herbicide, systemic herbicide like a glyphosate or saflufenacil, if possible, and that will actually go to the roots and kill it. So this is again an example of integrating two strategies, a mechanical as well as a chemical, and that works a lot. So I talked about herbicide toolbox for citrus. Post-emergent sprays, we have great tools. We have to think about coverage, spray volume, surfactants. We need to rotate, do not use the same herbicide over and over. Pre-emergent herbicides also, we need to bring at least one application. I'm telling you, if you do one application of pre-emergent herbicides, that's going to make you really, really reduce the number of post-emergent herbicides from our studies. Then we can think about improving the herbicide retention of pre-emergence, utilizing some deposition agents. And we have to think about hot weather consideration. Tree safety, accurate application. We have to think about the yield safety, like staying away from glyphosate near the fruit maturity window, coming back to the program after the harvest. Weed management, raw metals, there is mowing, integrating two techniques, chemical mowing and cover crops. It's emerging strategy. That's all I have. I have to thank my team here. They did all the hard work, and I'm just here to present. So all the kudos goes to my team, and then all my collaborators, funding agencies, and thank you very much. I will take any questions if I have time. Yeah. Yeah. It's oh, so sorry. The question was I showed a slide where I showed the paraquat effect on goatweed. So it was a gramoxone material, and we used 1 pint, and yeah, it's a 2 pound. It's a gramoxone 2.0. Yeah.
Any other questions from the auditorium?
Any questions from the Zoom
Okay. Okay, thank you, everybody, and I will see you next time.